Passengers see aircrafts, airlines see fleets, investors see financial statements, industry advisors like myself, we see something else, an invisible network of relationships that makes every one of those aircrafts possible. GKN Aerospace is one of the organizations sitting at the center of that network. In part 1 and 2 of this series, we have discussed the annual reports, the investor presentations, financial statements, industry announcements, and these sources allow us to observe the organization from the outside. But public information only tells us part of the story. Everything from this point onwards represents my professional observations and system analysis based on my own experience inside the organization. For the past 6 months, I had the opportunity to work inside GKN Aerospace, contributing to the NH90 program at a level just below the executive committee. That experience gave me something annual reports will not, a view of how information actually flows at this stage, how engineering, procurement, manufacturing, finance, and program management interact on a day-to-day basis. The observations I am about to share are my own professional perspective. They're not confidential, and they are not a judgment of the people working there. In fact, I have met capable engineers, program managers, and specialists who were deeply committed to delivering an exceptionally complex product. The interesting question isn't whether talented people exist. They absolutely do. The question is whether the organization's architecture allow those talented people to work together in the same efficiency that they work individually. That distinction actually became impossible for me to ignore. So rather than speaking in general terms about enterprise architecture, I would like to use GKN Aerospace as a real-world case study to explore how organizational complexity is experienced from the inside. Now, bear with me on this one, because even though this is about GKN Aerospace, this video and this presentation is applicable to literally all capital equipment industries. And if you are working in aerospace, you really have to tune in here. You really have to follow me, and you have to keep up with my case studies and the overall enterprise architecture ideas that I share. I actually share complex conceptual ideas on how to improve an enterprise as a whole. So follow along, please. As I mentioned earlier, I spent 6 months inside GKN Aerospace in a function grade 1 step below the executive committee layer. So needless to say, I had to take multiple decisions, and I was able to see the overall organization. And the overall organization is either not set up or almost working against the program I was in. I have to say this very frankly. There was confusion everywhere and dissatisfaction amongst employees who had to go through constant realignment and reabsorption into new reporting lines. And we can see this from the history of Melrose. In earlier episodes, we talked about the history, and I have clearly seen how changes at the top, changes at executive level, at management level, directly impacts the productivity of the teams. At the same time, many teams are serving programs and managers who sit in another company or country or time zone. Many teams sit in Romania, Netherlands, Sweden, or India, and they report to direct line managers in UK, but their hours are billed by programs sitting in a whole different nation. When you hear from an executive's perspective, this sounds rather fabulous and international. It is a multinational organization after all. It has a significant large portfolio of products delivered to numerous clients worldwide. So yes, there is a lot to be proud of. The exterior looks robust. There are, however, caveats in every single operational process within the organization. Somehow, the manufacturing hubs are pushed towards faster delivery as usual, while remaining completely disconnected from the rest of the organization. Interestingly, manufacturing still works with old processes established much prior to the acquisitions by Melrose. And you can see the story of acquisition by Melrose in the earlier episodes. This also means manufacturing often waits for confirmation through an existing PLM, which is a product lifecycle management system, where they need engineering drawings to be released after multiple rounds of approvals and authorizations. A typical product released by any manufacturing hub within the aerospace industry across the world requires authorization of engineering drawings through a series of in-depth layers of approval processes, which typically ranges from 3 to 7 approvers before reaching the manufacturing department. But more important, more often than not, there is a step where the authorization loop also needs to be serenaded by an external party, such as the NQO, which is the National Qualification Office within the NLR. In this case, it was a Netherlands Aerospace Center for the Netherlands, but then for Sweden, for France, there are other centers like that. Prior to going towards the NLR or any equivalent, the documents that lead towards an engineering drawing change has to be approved by an independent safety expert called Compliance Verification Engineer, CVE. And prior to that person comes a preparer, a checker, and an approver, all of who should work independently. Before reaching a CVE, all drawings must undergo an independent check and review process by qualified personnel who are not the originators of the design. Authorized design organizations evaluate whether a drawing release involves a major or minor change to the aircraft's typical design. Prior to even attaining a state where the engineering drawings are approved, authorized, and released, there needs to be multiple rounds of analysis for functional impact, and documentation of those analyses needs to be approved and authorized as well. The process of releasing an engineering drawing can take anywhere from 6 months to up to 3 years. I had to explain this because I want to show you how GKN Aerospace is organized today and at around 30% efficiency to reach the demands of the aerospace market, which is moving towards $300 billion towards 2030. That's a stretch. If you are a future client of GK Aerospace and is watching this video, one of the core questions you can put forward in the deal is whether the existing organization is ready to bear new challenges while the engineering challenges and deliverables of the past are still in the pipeline of things to be done. The organization within GKN Aerospace is silos prominent and, as usual, politically driven. GKN Aerospace isn't the old GKN anymore, who simply lost its mining and automotive divisions. It's not like that. It's a very historic company with processes, tools, and cultures of its own, who's grouped together with other companies like Fokker, IOCZ, Aerostructures Groups, Marco Aerospace, Dynamic Aerostructures, GKN Aerospace Sweden, and finally Carpenter Aerospace. Now it's an agglomerate of various different companies, individual companies that were put together under the brand name of GK Aerospace or Melrose Industries PLC. Earlier we discussed several programs generating value for the company, right? Please watch the video if you haven't. If I were a client of GK Aerospace or I was talking to Melrose Industries PLC, I would certainly be asking whether there has been a substantial improvement in the existing backlog at the manufacturing hubs and whether the promised delivery date is in fact aligned throughout the organization. Each program is dependent on resources, skill sets that are located in another company or region, as we already discussed. That's perfectly all right. What is not all right is that, as we discussed earlier, all these companies that were acquired after 2019 and merged into Melrose family haven't yet gotten away from their original priorities and means of working, nor reporting, and certainly not separated from keeping up with the alliances formed over many decades. And therefore, this creates an ecosystem through distorted channels flowing through multiple layers of human interpretation of what the priorities are and how to not deliver fast or not deliver at all. GKN Aerospace is now a cluster of independent set of histories and cultures forced together to work together towards one set goal, but the goal is not clear at all levels. Everyone has their own interpretation of what the priorities are and what the advantage for them would be. The short-term solutions have always been to keep the structures alive in the localized regions, but is it sustainable to deliver towards a market of $200 billion per year until 2030. From my perspective, it will not be possible. The company has to, at one point, delay some of the programs and therefore pay penalty towards the customers of those programs. And that ultimately contributes towards the overall profit margins. So far, we have spent quite a bit of time talking about symptoms: late delivery, supplier instability, engineering changes, working capital, cash conversion, program overruns, quality escapes. Each department sees its own version of reality. Finance sees margins, engineering sees drawings, procurement sees suppliers, manufacturing sees production, sales sees customers. Executives receive only those perspectives separately. Here's the question that I would like to ask. What if they never had to? Imagine walking into an executive committee meeting. Instead of 20 distorted reports, there is one cockpit, not an engineering dashboard, not a finance dashboard, not a procurement dashboard, but an enterprise dashboard. One final place where every function speaks the same language, financial value. That's exactly what this slide is proposing. Notice the flow across the very top. Commercial, engineering, procurement, manufacturing, supply chain, customer, financial outcome. This isn't an organizational chart. It's a value stream. Every decision made upstream eventually appears somewhere in the financial statements. The question is whether leadership can see that relationship before the quarter ends. For example, engineering changes don't simply affect engineering. They increase procurement overload, delay manufacturing, increase logistics cost, affect customer commitments, and they reduce the EBIT. Yet most organizations measure those effects separately. The cockpit reconnects them. Now look at the 6 health panels: the commercial health, engineering health, procurement health, manufacturing health, supply chain health, and customer health. Each function is measured twice. First, by operational performance. Second, by financial impact. That distinction is important because executives don't invest in KPIs. They invest in outcomes. Now move your attention towards the right side. Every positive contribution, every cost, every variant rolls up into one financial picture. Instead of asking who's responsible, the executive committee can ask, where is the value leaking? And that is a fundamentally different conversation. Now look across the bottom over here. See, you have revenue. Look across the bottom over here. Look across the bottom over here. You have revenue, backlog, budget versus expected completion, cash flow, early warning indicators, financial risks, decision opportunities. Notice something different. They aren't historical reports. They're predictive. They allow leadership to intervene while there is still time to influence the outcome. Not after the quarter has closed, but right now, immediately. They can ask questions to the right people at the right time. The most valuable section, in my opinion, sits at the very bottom right. The decisions that drive the most value right here. This is where our enterprise architecture becomes practical. It doesn't merely describe the organization. It identifies which executive decisions create the greatest financial return, accelerate supplier performance, reduce engineering rework, improve delivery reliability. Each recommendation is linked directly to financial value. This is not another dashboard. It is an executive operating system, one that continuously connects operating behavior to financial performance, because executives shouldn't need to mentally connect thousands of engineering decisions, procurement actions, supplier risks, and manufacturing constraints. The enterprise should actually do that for them. And I would like to emphasize something. Every metric on this page already exists somewhere inside a large aerospace company or a large company in general. Engineering has its systems. Finance has its systems. Procurement has its systems. Manufacturing and quality also do. The problem is rarely the absence of data. It is the absence of a common architecture that turns data into coordinated decisions. Everything we have discussed throughout this presentation now converges into one idea. And architecture is not documentation. Architecture is visibility. Architecture is coordination. Architecture is the ability to see tomorrow's financial outcome while today's engineering decisions are still being made. Before we go further with the following slides, I just want to make sure that you understand what I'm showing. An executive cockpit from operations to outcome. This is an example of a final dashboard that the executives would receive if they decide to hire Silk Route of Systems as their company advisor. Silk Route of Systems, what we do is that we go to a company, Silk Route of Systems. What do we exactly do? We go to an organization. We are generally invited, of course. We listen to them. We listen to their story. Of course, they will only talk about the high-level financial outcomes. But then we look at the various tools that are existing. We look at various different operational details. We look at what an engineer, what a chief engineer is doing, what a design engineer is doing, what a stress engineer is doing. We look at the manufacturing operators of different machines, but also operators that are being trained team, we look at the entire process. We look at the procurement managers, we look at the supply quality engineers, we look at all of their work, and then we find out where the hidden gaps are. And to connect them all together, we provide an enterprise architecture framework first. And we simply do not make dashboards because the world does not need more dashboards. There are enough of Power BI dashboards. There are enough of presentations as it is. What we do is we heal the organization. We provide frameworks using which the value of the organization, the overall decisions from executives to the operators of their various machines and the final manufacturing output, they are all connected seamlessly. That is the overall goal. So it always comes with a framework. It comes with a project mapping. We show how many years would it take, how much, what the business case would be for the executives, how much they can expect to yield, even if you get 1% visibility. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the end-to-end visibility for an executive into the deepest parts of his company. It's really important. And because many executives are in large organizations, many executives actually they inherit the organization. They have not been the founder or they have not been there since a long time. The people who are in the execution layers, who are the engineers or manufacturing heads, they have been there for a long time. So the executives generally are at the mercy of the middle management layers. And that is a natural phenomena. So the goal of Silk Route of Systems, the goal of these videos is to help executives. It's to be a partner for the executives. So definitely, if you like this video, if you like what we're doing here, please share the YouTube video. If you want to be an investor, if you want to be a patron to this initiative, please write to me at prachurya.b. Let's go back to the video again. The following slides will now unpack the cockpit one section at a time, showing how each function contributes to enterprise value and, more importantly, how executives can use that visibility to steer the organization rather than simply observe it, as I mentioned earlier. In the previous slide, I showed you an executive committee cockpit, 12 health areas, hundreds of metrics, financial indicators, operational indicators, strategic indicators. At first glance, it may have looked like an impressive dashboard, but I deliberately avoided explaining one very important thing. Why these metrics? Why not 50 others? Why these 12 categories? And why this particular structure? Because the cockpit wasn't designed by collecting ideas. It was designed by starting somewhere completely different. It started with the questions executives ask every single day. When I reflected on hundreds of executive discussions, program reviews, board reports, and organizational meetings, I realized something surprisingly simple. Almost every strategic conversation eventually comes back to 5 questions. Not 20, not 50, just 5. Those 5 questions became the foundation for the architecture developed through Silk Route of Systems. Everything else follows from them. The first question is, are we winning? This sounds obvious, but it's actually much broader than revenue. The first question is, are we winning? This sounds obvious, but it's actually much broader than winning. Winning means, are we growing a profitable business? Are our margins improving? Are customers choosing us again? Are we building a healthier pipeline than last year? Commercial health and financial health exist to answer that single question. The second question is, can we deliver? Winning contracts creates expectations. Delivery creates trust. Executives need immediate visibility into program health, engineering readiness, supplier readiness, manufacturing capacity, customer confidence, because a contract that cannot be delivered destroys value instead of creating it. The third question is, where are we blocked? This is perhaps the most important operational question. Every organization develops bottlenecks, approval queues, engineering changes, supplier constraints, information delays, capacity shortages. Most companies only discover these after programs begin slipping. The objective here is different. Find the bottleneck before it becomes tomorrow's executive problem. The fourth question asks, where will we fail next? And notice the wording, not where we have failed, but where we will fail. That's an entirely different mindset. Risk portfolio, supply chain health, workforce health, predictive indicators. These aren't historical reports. They're early warning systems. Think of them as the smoke detectors of the enterprise. Finally, a fifth question. Why should we invest? Because every executive committee ultimately allocates finite resources: people, capital, factories, technology, acquisitions, research, digital transformation. If those investments aren't connected to enterprise priorities, they become expensive activity rather than strategic advantage. Now, something interesting happens. Once these 5 questions are clearly defined, the metrics almost choose themselves. Commercial metrics answer whether we are winning. Program metrics answer whether we can deliver. Engineering and procurement reveal where we are blocked. Risk and supply chain indicate where we might fail next. Strategic portfolio shows where future investment should go. And then something I believe is missing from many executive dashboards appear: enterprise architecture health. Notice that enterprise architecture isn't presented as an IT function. It's not a compliance exercise. It's also not documentation. It measures something more fundamental. How easily can this enterprise coordinate itself? How many decisions are waiting for approval? How fragmented is our digital thread? How many disconnected systems still exist? How much manual interpretation is required before work can move forward? Those questions determine how quickly an organization can respond to change. That is why I deliberately placed enterprise architecture alongside commercial, manufacturing, and finance, not underneath IT, because architecture influences every one of those domains simultaneously. Now look across the very bottom of the slide. These are what I call the enablers of executive success: the integrated data, end-to-end visibility, predictive intelligence, collaborative culture, decision velocity. Notice something. None of these are technologies. They are organizational capabilities. Technology supports them, architecture connects them, leadership activates them. So the purpose of this framework isn't to create another dashboard. Large organizations, as I mentioned earlier, already have thousands of dashboards. The purpose is to reduce cognitive load. Instead of asking executives to interpret hundreds of disconnected reports, we organize into enterprise information around 5 universal questions. Questions every executive committee already asks every Monday, every board meeting, every quarterly review. And that's why I call this an executive committee operating cockpit. Not because it displays information, because it helps leadership navigate complexity. Just as an aircraft cockpit does not show every sensor on the aircraft, it shows the information the pilot needs to make the next decision. An executive committee deserves exactly the same. The next step is perhaps the most important one. We have now established what executives should be looking at. The question becomes, how do we build an organization capable of producing this level of visibility consistently? Because a cockpit is only as reliable as the architecture feeding it. And that takes us into the next part of the journey. Because, as I mentioned earlier, Silk Route of System, we differ in our consultation process. We do not simply provide dashboards. We are not a software as a service company. No, we're not. We are industry healers. We are industry consultants. Our goal is to do right by the executives. Our goal is to be a partner with the executives. Our goal is to provide end-to-end visibility to the executives. So a dashboard, will that solve the problem? Not at all. Anybody can make a dashboard. What will solve their problems is architecture, 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 and architecture. The entire organization has to evolve in order to make sure that such a dashboard, such kind of metrics, and as you see here, a cockpit like this can be developed, can be functional for the executives. Ultimately, the goal is that such kind of an executive cockpit actually becomes the capital asset of that company, which increases their leverage during the next merger and acquisition rounds.